Hi everyone, I'm going to share my sermon for the day. The scriptures are from the book of Habakkuk, chapter 1, verse 1 to 4, and then chapter 2, verse 1 to 4. And then the gospel reading is Luke chapter 19, verse 1 to 10. So feel free to pause the video and have a read and then come back to the video. So in the book of the Jewish prophet Habakkuk, we're hearing more from that time when ancient Israel was under siege from their enemies, Babylon. And the prophet says that they're surrounded on all sides, there's no justice to be seen. But he says anyway that he's going to go up the watchtower and look out at what is happening and pay attention. And he's going to look out and see what God might be doing in this situation. And after a while, God tells Habakkuk, make a sign that's so big and clear that anyone running past will be able to see what it says. Make a sign that tells people that this will end and there will be justice. Make it so clear that even if somebody is fleeing past, they will still be able to see that sign of hope and they'll be inspired and encouraged to carry on being faithful in the situation. I've often heard Christians talking about what's going on in our society at the end of October, Halloween, and when people dress up as monsters and fiends and other frightening things. And I've heard Christians say it's satanic, it's evil, we should have nothing to do with it. And I've heard people say it's Americanization, we don't want that here, we want to stay Australian. And whatever that means, whatever being Australian means. And I've heard people say it's not safe to be walking around outside at night, we shouldn't be encouraging this. And I've heard people saying lots of plastics, what a waste. But I like what folks at one of our churches have been doing, because I heard about what the Banyul network of uniting churches was doing in Heidelberg on the main street, because they knew that there was going to be a lot of people out in their community trick-or-treating, and so they put on a barbecue outside the church, and they invited people into the church, they invited people to gather, and they offered a place for people to remember the people that they loved who have died, because that's something that the church normally does at this time. It's connected to Halloween. We remember the people that are close to us who have died, and we remember the saints who have gone before us and inspired our faith. So they invited their community in for it, and they also let their community know about an opportunity that's coming up at their church that they have every year, a space for people to talk about death, because often people feel like they can't talk about death. There's good reason for us to do things like this at Halloween, at All Souls, at All Saints, because it's an opportunity to remind the wider community about why Christians don't need to be afraid of death. Death is still painful, death still upsets us. It doesn't mean that death isn't hard, but we have hope of the resurrection. And we have an opportunity to make it clear to the community that we're not afraid of death, that we have hope. So getting back to the scriptures, in the Jewish scripture, Habakkuk the prophet climbed up a watchtower to be able to see what God was doing. And now in the Christian gospel, we've heard about Zachaeus, the tax collector, climbing up a tree so that he could see Jesus and hear what Jesus was saying. And last week we had Jesus telling a strange story about a tax collector. There was a holy person and a tax collector praying separately in the temple, each in their own private corner. And the Holy One, he was sure of his goodness when he prayed. The tax collector was ashamed when he prayed, and he just asked for mercy. And Jesus said that tax collector went home justified, because there was room for God's Spirit to move in his life and to transform him, even though he'd done bad things. And now we have, just a little bit later, a story of Jesus meeting an actual particular tax collector. And tax collectors, like I was saying last week, were very unpopular. They were considered to be collaborators because the Jewish people were under occupation by the Romans, and these tax collectors were Jewish people who were collecting tribute for Rome. They were collecting the tax and they were adding their own fees onto it. They were able to get a pretty good living out of it. And this guy Zachaeus, he's actually a manager of a whole lot of tax collectors. So he's at the top of a pyramid of them, basically. So what they're doing was making their neighbours' lives really difficult. for their own pleasure, basically. And what they were doing was considered especially improper because the Roman coins that everyone had to use to pay the tax were stamped with the face of the emperor on one side. The emperor claimed to be a god, and stamping his face on the coins as a way of trying to force everybody to use that Roman money as a way of worshipping him. So tax collectors, they could be very rich, but their neighbors saw their money as evil and dirty money. They saw them as worshipping an idol of the emperor and selling out their own country. And this particular man, Zachaeus, manager of tax collectors, so he's very rich and influential, but his neighbors hate him. And he's unusually short too. It might be that he couldn't have done manual work that a lot of other men might have been able to do. So he might not have had a lot of options for work to do. It could be that he's almost forced to be a tax collector or do some other kind of role like that. He might not have many options. And there might be another reason why he's unpopular to begin with, because a lot of the time people thought if somebody was born like incredibly short, they might believe that that's a sign that his parents have sinned. They might see him as a cursed individual. Jesus doesn't agree with that, but that's how a lot of people would have seen it. And so they might just not want anything to do with him. They might have rejected him because they saw him as a sign of sin. They might have been afraid of him. They might have seen him as a monster. I wonder if he's needed to climb trees before, because it's an unusual thing to do. Maybe he's had to climb the trees before in order to avoid a crowd, in order to avoid a mob. So he's climbed this tree so he can see clearly, so that he can see Jesus coming. He's isolated, but he isolates himself further by moving up above the crowd into the tree. And he probably also knows that the crowd probably don't want him close to them. But the unthinkable thing happens. Zachaeus doesn't just see Jesus from the tree. Jesus also sees him in his isolation up in the tree away from the crowd. And Jesus says, "Come down and be with me, be with us. We need to go to your house." Normally a holy person wouldn't do that. They would be worried about being associated with a tax collector, especially one who appears to be cursed. His house has been paid for by dirty money. The food has been paid for by dirty money. The pious people in the crowd are shocked by this, but they're also being challenged to not just pray with a tax collector, like in the parable, but also to eat with him, to eat food offered by him. I think this call to share the table means Zachaeus changes too. He puts the tax that's been collected to good use to help those who need it. That's a clear, unmissable sign of hope and justice. It's a sign that'll get people's attention, even if they're just running past. We can all be changed if we're willing to associate with people who are not like us. It can create a new kind of society. It can create the kind of world that we hope for.